Unknown armed men suddenly appeared on the streets of the Venezuelan capital, Caracas, the day before, and chaotic shooting began. At first, it wasn't entirely clear what was happening. But later, the authorities simply stated that an unidentified drone was spotted over the presidential palace, and the military tried to shoot it down. But rumors had already appeared online that some of the military in Venezuela were refusing to obey the new president, Delcy Rodriguez, and were almost preparing a coup and a seizure of power. At the same time, in connection with the capture of Nicolas Maduro by the United States, the Venezuelan government began repressions, arresting journalists among others and using paramilitary groups to suppress any signs of support for the overthrow of the authoritarian leader. It's a war. Military forces are now on city streets imposing order. And now insiders claim that Venezuela's Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino, has indeed promised the support of the country's armed forces to President Rodriguez after she was sworn in as acting president on Monday. At the same time, Donald Trump has already demanded that the new president expel all intelligence networks from Venezuela, particularly agents from Russia and China, and also impose a complete oil embargo against opponents of the United States. So what is really happening in Venezuela today? We will discuss this in this episode. My name is Alexi Pecci. Let's discuss this topic together, but before we start, I ask you to subscribe to the channel, like this episode, and leave any comment under this video. This really helps a lot in promoting the content on YouTube. I would appreciate your comments and be sure to subscribe to my Telegram channel Pecci News. The link is in the description of this video. There we publish breaking news as it comes in.
Antoni? Damn, why are you reaching for the ground? Mandando tirar al suelo hasta carajo neri. If you hear what he's saying and that you're coming, I live here and Caraco is telling you. Damn, that's scary, man.
These are the kind of shots that appeared online last night. This is Caracas, right in the center of the Venezuelan capital, and the local media reported on this cautiously, saying that gunfire was heard in the area of the Miraflores presidential palace in Caracas. According to local media, security forces opened fire on unidentified drones conducting unauthorized flights near the Miraflores palace. In social media videos, gunfire could be heard. In addition, motorcycles appeared in the area of the incident. These are usually used by the so-called colectivos forces. I'll explain who they are later. The story was eventually hushed up. Although there were rumors online that part of the military wing of the Chavistas, meaning the UGA Chavez movement, did not support President Rodriguez, who is ready to cooperate with the Americans, and supposedly they could have staged the provocation. But what is certain is that the military began repressions all over Venezuela. The Financial Times writes that in connection with the capture of Nicolas Maduro by the United States, the Venezuelan government began repressions, arresting journalists and using paramilitary groups to suppress any signs of support for the overthrow of the authoritarian leader Nicolas Maduro. The wave of repression began as Delcy Rodriguez, former deputy of Nicolas Maduro and now the new president of the country, tried to consolidate her power in the oil-rich nation. After an unexpected operation by American special forces in which Maduro was kidnapped from a military base, an interesting point arises. Vladimir Padrino, who had long served as Venezuela's Minister of Defense, promised the support of the armed forces to President Rodriguez after she was sworn in. And now I'll quote the Venezuelan Minister of Defense. Venezuelan military will support Rodriguez in carrying out the difficult task required of her by geopolitical instability and the fate of the homeland. Count on us. Well, in fact, this means that the Rodriguez family is taking full power in Venezuela into their own hands. Delcy Rodriguez is the president, her brother Jorge Rodriguez is the head of parliament, but now the military supports them too. And right after that, under the state of emergency declared on Monday, which prohibits Venezuelans from expressing support for the actions of the United States, armed paramilitary units were sent to the streets of Caracas. Known as colectivas, simply put, these colectivas are paramilitary groups of civilians who have been given the authority to detain people. Before that, they provided security for the outer perimeter around the palace of Nicolas Maduro, meaning they patrolled the streets around the president's residence. Now, these paramilitary groups, these people are basically hunting those who supported the takeover of Maduro by the Americans. Media workers' unions in Venezuela reported that 14 journalists and media employees, 11 of them from foreign outlets, by the way, were detained for several hours, interrogated, and then released. The National Union of Press Workers of Venezuela reported that most journalist arrests occurred near the National Assembly during Rodriguez's swearing-in. After American Special Forces captured Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores, on Saturday, the remaining part of his regime tried to suppress public celebrations in the streets. And so, in the decree on the introduction of a state of emergency, which was dated January 3rd but published in the official gazette only on Monday, the authorities were instructed, quote, to immediately begin searching for and arresting any person involved in promoting or supporting the armed attack by the United States on the territory of the Republic. Currently, a state of emergency is in effect in Venezuela, which allows for restrictions on people's freedom of movement and the confiscation of property necessary for national defense, as well as the suspension of the right to assemble and protest. In short, you can't go out to celebrate the overthrow of Maduro. It is reported that Venezuelan police authorities are checking people's phones to see if they have anything that could be interpreted as support for United States actions. And if they find anything, they arrest them immediately. In addition, the police have taken control of all groups known as colectivos, those very same paramilitary organizations. They now control all checkpoints at the exits from cities, and all these colectivos groups are under the control of Venezuela's Minister of Internal Affairs, Diosdado Cabello. These are members of the radical faction of Maduro's regime, and by the way, he was in charge of the police in 2020 when there was an attempt to overthrow Nicolas Maduro's regime in May. There was an invasion of this country. Americans were also involved, and this Cabello was in charge of the police at that time as well, so he is clearly a man of Maduro's regime, but he was kept in power, and here we are. Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, in an interview with Fox News, called the repression truly alarming, stating that the United States government should closely monitor their progress. Delcy Rodriguez is a key organizer of torture, persecution, corruption, and drug trafficking. She is the main ally of Russia, China, and Iran. That's why international investors can't trust this person, and she is rejected by the Venezuelan people. And here's where an interesting point comes up. Among the first to congratulate Delcy Rodriguez on her inauguration were the ambassadors of Russia, China, and Iran. That's why there are definitely a lot of questions for her. One of the sources of the Financial Times says that, according to many in Caracas, Maduro's capture was the result of a traitor in his ranks, despite the fierce shootout that preceded his capture, during which dozens of his bodyguards were killed. By the way, he was guarded by Cubans. And Cuba stated that about 40 people were indeed killed, most of whom were bodyguards, and those were Cubans, because it was Cuba that helped Maduro stay in power. And here's what the Financial Times writes. The tension in Caracas after the United States strike was evident from the gunshots heard near the presidential palace on Monday evening. A representative of the Venezuelan government stated that this happened because of drones flying over the area without permission and warning shots fired by the police. There was no confrontation and the entire country is in a state of complete calm. Meanwhile, Donald Trump urged the new president of Venezuela not to play with fire. Donald Trump presented a number of demands to the interim president of Venezuela, Delcy Rodriguez, and stated that he is ready to send troops to the country if she refuses to cooperate with the Americans. The main demand from Washington is to tighten measures against drug trafficking, to expel agents of countries or networks hostile to the United States, and to stop selling oil to opponents of the United States of America. In addition, the United States called on Rodriguez, who was sworn in after the capture of Nicolas Maduro, to release all Americans from Venezuelan prisons. Also, according to the sources, United States officials expect that the new head of Venezuela will facilitate free elections in the country and then voluntarily resign, otherwise she will simply be removed. Such demands, aimed at strengthening relations between the two countries, had previously been rejected by Nicolas Maduro. And Trump has already hinted that if Rodriguez ends up behaving the same way as Maduro, she will face a fate even worse than Maduro's. On Monday, Trump stated that if Rodriguez stops cooperating with American officials, he may send troops to Venezuela. And he says, "We are ready to do it. In fact, we expected that we might have to do it, but for now, we will try to negotiate with Rodriguez." And Rodriguez herself, let me remind you, on Sunday called on Washington for reconciliation and cooperation, stating that the new government of Venezuela invites the United States to work together on a cooperation program aimed at mutual development within the framework of international law and at strengthening lasting coexistence in the community. In general, for now, the same people remain in power in Venezuela, meaning everyone who was there under Maduro. But for now, it looks like they are still ready to negotiate with the Americans. And as the former United States ambassador to Venezuela said yesterday, the Americans don't have the goal of building democracy in that country. Their goal is different. It's to establish relations so that there isn't a hostile regime there. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like if you found this episode useful or the information interesting. You can support the work of this YouTube channel financially with any donation or subscription using the links and details provided. In the description of this video it says support the channel Alexei Pechi. Choose any format that's convenient for you. Thank you for any support. Take care. Goodbye everyone.